this episode of DevTalk with Rich and Vin, we're joined by Matt Johnson, the CEO of Silicon Labs. Matt came up through the engineering ranks and understands what it takes to both engineer a great product and drive a successful company. Good afternoon, and welcome to the next episode of DevTalk with Rich and Vin. I am Rich, and the guy on the other side there is Vin. How you doing, Vin?
Great, Rich. How are you?
I am doing really good. So I think I shared my big news with you, but I'll share it for everybody. I became a grandpa this week for the first time. So it's a podcast, so you can't see me. I'm not that old. I'm really one of those really young grandpas.
He actually is pretty old, guys, just so you know.
But anyway, yeah, that's the big news for us. And it's, for anybody in that situation, you know what it's like. So I am headed up to New Jersey very shortly to hold my new granddaughter. So that's exciting. Top that one, Vin.
You're going to raise the kid in New Jersey?
Well, I was raised in New Jersey, and I mean, look how great I turned out.
Yeah, I'll repeat that. You're going to raise him in New Jersey? You raise the kid in New Jersey?
Well, I'm going to try like heck to get my daughter and my son-in-law to move down here to Florida with us, but I don't think that's in the cards, but we shall see. Okay, so the last podcast we did, we used our alternate format, and I'm doing air quotes around alternate format, where we had a guest, where we had some fun with our guest, and it was a little less technical, but it was actually a lot of fun. That was with the CEO of Digi International. So today we have the president and CEO of Silicon Labs, and that would be Matt Johnson. Hello, Matt. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So one time I had somebody from Silicon Labs on a podcast, and I said SiLabs. And my guest said, hold on, we don't go by that. We don't want to be referred to as SiLabs. We're Silicon Labs or Silicon Laboratories. Does that still stand?
Yeah, I think I'm less sensitive to it. I think any coverage is generally good coverage, but we call it Silicon Labs as a general rule.
Okay. All right. So let's dive into your history a little bit. Let's get people to understand what you're doing here. And you're not a long time Silicon Labs, or if I remember, it's like 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And before I forget, congratulations on becoming a grandfather. That's exciting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been around 6 years, almost 6 years now. And I came in to lead the IoT group here at Silicon Labs. And over time and through divestiture, that's become the entire company. And I've been in the CEO role now almost 2.5 years.
Now, I'd say you're a technical guy, but I looked at your bio and you went to the University of Maine for EE. Does that even qualify?
Is the implication that the two cannot both coexist?
Obviously, we're having some fun with you, but Vin and I go back and forth. He went to Stevens Tech. I went to NJIT. He thinks his school's better. I think my school's better. But yeah, we definitely do that frequently. But I'm sure you got a great education hunting elk and whatever else it is you do up there in Maine.
Not so many elk, but they do have moose up there, which are unusual for some people to see for the first time.
Now, are you from that part of the country originally?
Yeah, both my wife and I are born and raised in Maine. And in my case, more on the extreme end, I grew up in northern Maine near the Canadian border on a farm that is still up there today. That's still where my parents live. So a very rural area. Think agriculture, forestry, and definitely not easy to get to.
Huh. I mean, everybody thinks of Maine, you think lobster, and you were probably pretty far from lobster.
No lobster up there.
All right. So how did that journey go? How'd you get from Maine to Silicon Labs? What happened in the interim there?
Yeah, well, it was an easy way to think about it. How I got into semiconductors was my first internship, just by default, kind of happened in the semiconductor space. I was at IBM, and I was in their semiconductor group focusing on the x86 processors. And that's kind of was my initial exposure to it. And then my first job full-time was with Fairchild Semiconductor, which was headquartered in Maine at the time, no longer.
The South Portland office. I've been there many times.
That's exactly right. Way back when, believe it or not, they used to export more semiconductors from Maine than lobster. So that was back in those days.
Wow.
And yeah, so I started there, and then we moved our headquarters from the East Coast to the West Coast, and that's when I moved to the Bay Area.
Oh, so you moved with Fairchild?
Yeah, exactly. So I worked there for many years, and when we moved the headquarters, moved to the West Coast, and so lived and worked in the Bay Area for years, actually. And then when I moved to Austin, Texas, which was 12 years ago, roughly now, that was to start at Freescale. So that's kind of the East Coast to West Coast, and now to Texas, which is where we plan to stay.
Okay, so let's do a little history lesson here and show people how little we know about our industry. Fairchild is one of the original semiconductor companies, like original, like back in the
you bet
60s, I'll say.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Fairchild.
Hey, did you work Fairchild there in the 60s?
No, Rich, I did not work there in the 60s. But interestingly, I worked in Silicon Valley on a project with his team. We could talk about that later, I think, while he was there. So.
Yeah, so I'll be careful in case anyone was there. So I'm not speaking as an authority that I'm not, but definitely Fairchild was one of the originals. Really, Fairchild and Texas Instruments really helped spawn what has become the semiconductor industry today. So,
right.
Really,
the Intel guys come out of Fairchild?
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's correct. Right. The Traitorous 8.
Okay, so I got it. Okay, that's pretty good. I mean, I obviously came much later than that, so I only know what's in the history books. Okay, so you're in Austin at Freescale, did you become NXP as well in
that's
that
right.
transition?
Yeah, went through that transition and journey. I mean, the easy way to think about it is I started, way back when at Fairchild. The focus was really on the handset space, and that was an amazing journey, getting to watch handsets become what they are today, and the smartphones that are kind of ubiquitous as part of our everyday lives. And in that, we focused on mobile power, analog, high precision analog type solutions. And then at Freescale, it was automotive, so focused on going away from analog to bigger digital, focusing on software development and the automotive segment, which was, as an amazing segment and an incredible experience. And then transitioned after that to the IoT and, into the wireless domain. So each of those has been, really quite incredible in terms of a learning experience, whether it was the company culture, the technology, or the end segments. Each had their own pros and cons, as you can imagine.
So how did you get from, hey, I want to be an electrical engineer to, hey, I want to be the CEO of $1 billion company? I mean, was that always in the back of your head, or did that just sort of happen?
Rich, I'd love to tell you a great story, but it's very disappointing that I didn't have a grand plan, that I knew what I wanted, I saw it, and I executed and made it happen. That was not the case. When I started as an engineer, I had no ambition, aspirations to lead a team or let alone lead a company. And, very long story short, just 2 or 3 years into my first job, I remember getting pulled aside by my manager's manager, and they said, hey, congratulations, you've just been promoted. And I remember thinking in my head, I didn't ask. And they said, we have a team that we were going to basically let go. And we decided to do an experiment instead. And we're going to give you a team. And we want you to see if you all can come up with a strategy and change the course of this team. And if you can't, we're going to have to let the team go, but it'll be a great learning experience no matter what. And I remember it was defining for me, sitting in that room, just 2 or 3 years out of university, looking at this team of, very capable, accomplished people who've been there and done that. And they're looking at me thinking, oh no. And I didn't know what to do except just tell them the truth. I told them that, I've never done this. I'm not pretending I know something I don't. I don't know how we're going to do this, but what I do know is if we're going to do this, we're going to have to work together. We're going to have to lean on each other. And it doesn't guarantee success, but it's going to give us the highest probability of success as possible. And long story short, that worked out. We were successful, and that team ended up, absorbing, 6 or 7 more businesses over time. And every time that, original experience that was so defining, I kept coming back to is one, don't pretend you know anything you don't. And, approach every new role with an open mind and lean on your team. You gotta have a great team around you. And, I learned that very early, and it's still serving me well.
I'm happy that it had a good ending. I didn't know if I should ask how the story ended or not.
It did. And let's be honest, right? The team did a great job figuring out a path forward. And there's also some luck and timing involved in these things too.
So I spent a fair amount of time with Dr. T, who you probably know, who's the CEO of National Instruments. They're NI now. And he did not want to be, probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I'll say it anyway. He didn't want to be in the CEO's office. He wanted to be in the engineering lab, and he wanted to be with the engineers. And that's where he really enjoyed spending his time. Where do you sit there? Would you rather be sitting with the engineers or sitting with the business people?
I'd say in terms of enjoying it, both are equally fun to engage with and talk to without exaggeration, right? It's just a completely different experience. One, you have energy and passion around something that someone's figured out or a problem someone's trying to solve. And in the business domain, it's usually around an opportunity or a challenge that people are trying to navigate. Both are puzzles that people are trying to solve, so they're exciting. But, just if you step back and think about it honestly, it's hard because, everyone says there's not much you can do to prepare for this. Technically you can go to university for that. Business, you can go to university for that. But the leadership side and having, not one manager, but so many stakeholders, whether it's investors, the board, your employees that you have a huge sense of obligation to, that's tough to prepare for. And it's definitely a learning experience.
I got the same question for you, Vin. You've been in both those positions as well. Where would you rather spend your time?
As I was listening to Matt talk, I was feeling the same feelings. Both are interesting challenges. I still like to get sometimes too technical. I remember when I first joined Renesas as a VP, and they wanted to shop me around as the new VP, and we went out to Whirlpool, who was starting to use one of their new parts back in the Synergy days. And the engineers were filling us in on what they were doing. And they said, we're having trouble figuring out how to get this one pin to do these 3 different functions. But other than that, we're really moving forward. And in the next half hour, I kind of sketched up a circuit on my notepad because I really wanted to figure this out. And I remember handing it to him at the end and saying, try this and see if it works. And he looked at me and he said, you're gonna have a real hard time letting go of this engineering thing, aren't you? So it's sort of always in you, I think, but it's also, it's one of the things that makes you look at some of these problems differently. I do a lot of speaking at schools, as you know, on making presentations and doing and transitioning your career because, Matt, you haven't heard me talk about this yet probably, but I think that both universities and businesses do a terrible job of helping students transition across the mucous membrane between academia and industry. In our industry that moves so quickly, even if a professor was in a job for a while, if they're gone 5 years, they have no idea what the industry is doing anymore. And the new graduate population is such a small portion of the HR stat for companies that you just can't get the share of mind that takes them to make that transition. So I talk about this all the time. And one of the things I say is, look, everything you learn and every experience you have polishes the lens through which you look at the world. And no 2 people look at the world exactly the same. And you won't look at the world the same way as you have different experiences and learn different things. There's a great book called What got you here won't get you there. Matt, I'm sure you've read it. And if you, it's okay to remember and utilize the skills you had before, but if you look at the new problem set in exactly the same way, you won't be successful, right? So I think making that transition, you sort of make light of it and it just sort of happened, but a lot of that is mindset and awareness as well. I have tons of friends from Stevens who spent their entire career, we're all getting close to retirement, some have retired, and they completely rejected the management path and they wanted to stay engineers. And, some of them I think could have been good engineers. I look at the students now and they're not the same as when we graduated. There were plenty of people when we graduated that they basically got hired and put in a room and got meat thrown at them once a week because of their social skills. But that's not what we're graduating today. And so I think, people like you are an inspiration to those kids, that there is more to do sometimes and more and different problems to solve than just the engineering ones.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Matt that question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but when brand new, fresh out of college kids start at Silicon Labs, are they ready? Or is there a few months, 6 months, a year before they can do real work?
No, well, quick answer is no, they're not ready. I couldn't agree more with, what Vin just said, right? That there's a gap between, the technology world that we live and work in and academia in general, that, there's some critical and valuable skills that are learned there and they can complement what they do at work. But a lot of times there's a transition and a whole additional set of learning that has to take place for those employees. And, like I said earlier, on the technical side, a lot of that foundation, absolutely critical. Even on the business side, the foundation can be built and can be critical, but no replacement for real life experience. And as you said, as you experience, you build that lens or filter that you see the world through and you operate in. And one of the bigger gaps is I believe humbly on the people side and the leadership side of how to work with others and how to lead teams and how to operate in that environment that, if we're honest about it, think about the percentage of time at university you're spending on each subject, and then think of how you're going to be spending your time in the professional domain. And they're out of whack. They're not in alignment. And I think that's, a challenge and an opportunity. We've had to create our own university without exaggeration. We call it Silicon Labs University, and we have hundreds and hundreds of courses to, one, continue to develop people, but also help them transition as effectively as possible from university to this domain for exactly these reasons.
Okay, so the question I was asked, what's the most important thing that they did not teach you in college?
At least for me, and I can't speak for anyone else, but at least for me, is knowing the importance of, having a compass and values and making sure those are rock solid. So that's one. Two, especially in this role, the time management piece is, you can learn on some level, but being able to operate that at this scale is critical. And then the other piece that I think is just more light, but I still think it's critical is, one, don't be obsessed with that career path. Most people you talk to, it wasn't a straight line. The line can move around, and make sure that whatever you end up doing, it's something that you believe in, you enjoy. You don't have to love every day, but most days, because you're going to be putting a lot of your life, if you look back and reflect on it, into this. So make sure you enjoy it and value it, because you don't want to be spending your time on something that you don't believe in and that you don't think you can make that impact and it's worth doing. So to me, those things are not discussed and focused on as much at university, but at least for me, they've been elemental for me to navigate my professional career and to navigate what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. Okay, so I think this is your quote, which I found on LinkedIn.
Sounds risky already.
for Silicon Labs, we will not stop until wireless connectivity is something that just works everywhere for everyone. Is that an attainable goal?
Absolutely. It's getting closer all the time. And here's an easy way to think about it. That I think that was my quote. Think of the scale that I'm trying to think of some good examples. Think of the scale of PCs in terms of the volume that are shipped globally, or handsets, automotive, all these markets we talk about. In general, handsets maybe a couple billion units a year. Then think of all the other markets of, let's call it the edge or extreme edge of wirelessly connected devices, embedded or not. And now you're talking tens of billions of devices. So we've already entered another domain in terms of, what semiconductors are seeing in terms of the application of a technology and the volumes behind that. And we're still early innings. And what we're seeing as part of that is wireless is getting easier. It's always been higher touch, not as easy for people to adopt. But we're getting to a point where there's a lot of customers that are low to no touch in terms of their adoption of wireless technology. And if you can get some there, you're probably going to be able to get the mass of the market there as well over time. And if you look at trends that are happening in our space, it's moving in that direction at a large scale. Think of Matter. The whole vision behind Matter is making it easier for consumers, easier for developers, and filling a key gap that existed in the market. Think of Sidewalk from Amazon. Again, the whole vision is making it easier for things to connect. So we're seeing things in terms of a scale for the semi industry, a scale of cooperation across tech companies, a scale of new standards and ecosystems that are all moving things in that direction. So absolutely possible. And I would argue it's happening.
Okay.
Not arrived, but it's happening.
I disagree, but I want to, before I give you an answer, I want to hear what Vin's answer is. Is that an attainable goal? Yeah, we're not hearing you, Vin. Sorry. Now you're gonna make me.
I have to apologize that my phone overheated and it had to cool down and I had to rejoin. Ask me the question, please.
Yeah. I said Matt is on record saying that Silicon Labs won't stop until wireless connectivity is something that works everywhere for everyone. And he says that that's an attainable goal, and I say that it's actually not. But I didn't give my reason yet. Do you think that's an attainable goal?
I think it's an attainable goal, but I don't know that we are walking toward achieving the goal in the way we do things. I mean, there are very few places where there isn't some kind of radio signal now. The question is it one you're compatible with? And so right now, the way we do things, you're picking one or two, but you might have to have over time 12 different things to choose from if you're going to connect with the same device everywhere. And we could get there. Hey, what we have on our wrist now is more computing than was used to put the first man on the moon, and that was the size of 3 living rooms and had to be overly air conditioned. And now, except for my cell phone dying in the heat, we walk around with it on our wrist. And if you look, I mean, even if you look over the last 20, not even 20 years, 15 years, how small the cell phone has gotten with 10 or 100 times the capability, right? The old amps phones that just did phone and, for a while, the first ones didn't even do text, right? So, and now we're walking around with a computer in our pocket and it weighs less and lasts longer on a smaller battery than it did. So I think we have to rethink how we approach the landscape. I think it's possible, but I don't think we're on a path to get there yet.
Okay. My reason is that the technology just keeps changing and becoming newer and different. And there's something faster, there's something smaller, and that is not necessarily compatible with what we had before. And that's my reason why I think it'll just never. Everybody will have everybody connected and it to be easy. There's always, maybe those early adopters are leading edge and they can figure it out. But until my dad can have a watch that he can sync with his whatever it is without having to think twice about it. And I don't see that happening.
Well, I think it's
Yeah,
a question
I think
of
it's
your.
a good point.
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I think it's a good point that it's not easy to use and not as easy as it should be to use. But it's an incredibly cynical view when we're already, in the tens of billions of devices being adopted every year and growing quickly. No debate that we haven't arrived, but the trend would indicate we're heading in a very encouraging direction. The question might be, when does it get to that point? And you could argue in terms of how long it might take.
Ben, did our
Well-
guest just call me cynical?
He did.
In a very nice way. In a very nice way. It's very clear that one of the things he learned was diplomacy as he went from engineer to CEO. I think
Good job, Matt. We'll have you back.
Yeah, I think there's two things to talk about. One is, Rich, you're assuming that there isn't any obsolescence. Yes, there'll be new standards and the old ones will fall out. But, it's like if I put in something that fails in 21, 27, does that limit me? That's, over 100 years from now. So you're going to have things move, and we'll drop off one kind of wireless and add it on the other end and things will roll. So I don't think that's the problem. I think, Matt said billions of IoT devices. Honestly, I think that's a bigger problem in a different space. Where are we getting power for all of this, right? I mean, not everything can be energy harvested. And so we are already taxing the grid. We have what, 5% of the cars are electric, and they're asking people to charge them in off hours. Imagine when we get to 80. And how are we going to power 54 billion IoT devices if each one takes even less than a tenth of a watt, right? That is still an awful lot of power to have to generate on top of what we're generating now inefficiently. So I think it's not a univariant problem. It's a multivariant problem, and it's not even within our scope to fix it. When I talk to students, Rich, when you and I graduated, nobody wanted to go work at a power plant. That was like the dirtiest, dingiest. As an electrical engineer, you really felt like you failed. Now it's one of the most exciting things around. There's security, and there's networking, and there's reconfigurability, and local generation, and local storage, and distribution, and areas of generation that were power generation that weren't even thought of 40 years ago when we graduated, 45 years ago for me. So, I think the movement of the technology in the world around these problems is going to be so great that you can't say it's never going to happen. You just have to say it's going to take a lot to get there. If that's our goal, we need to look at everything, not just one thing.
Okay, so I know it's policy at Silicon Labs, you don't talk about unannounced products, but I want you to describe for me, what is the product you're going to be announcing 3 years from now?
Sure. So maybe I'll take this approach to try to help answer your question and not violate our policy. So 3 years from now, what we'll be talking about is our next generation, which is Series 3. We're in our current generation right now, which is Series 2. They're poorly named because Series 2 is actually our 4th generation. So Series 3 will be our 5th generation. We have a marketing challenge there. So in 3 years from now, we'll be talking about a lot of products coming from Series 3 platform. And why is that interesting? Why is that relevant? We're going to be in a different domain, I believe. And of course, technology, it never happens as fast as people think. And it always takes longer. But at the end of the day, there will be some new challenges that I think our customers need to deal with. And, a few examples, I think their applications are going to have significantly more compute capability in this domain, whether it's general purpose or, machine learning. I think both of those will be pretty substantially higher than they are today. The need for interoperability and wireless performance, right? We just touched on this. Making sure everything works with everything as seamlessly and as for the user as easy as possible. I think there's a scalability element that we're talking scalability of volumes that our semi space has never seen before. And being able to support those in terms of development and even manufacturing, I think is going to be critical. And supporting new trends, right? Think of how fast generative AI has moved, and we can debate it's in the hype cycle, but I think most would agree the impacts are going to be substantial and yet to come. And how does that impact the embedded space, and how much software development in embedded is being supported by generative AI? And what are the implications of that on memory and flexibility of your solutions? And do we move into a domain where the hardware needs to be infinitely more flexible and adaptable as the software moves, so much faster? It's always moved faster, but it's accelerating. It's not slowing down. So all those things, I think, are what you're going to see in products 3 years from now. That it's what we're working on today, and I think it's going to be required or requisite capabilities for our customers down the road, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years, which is tough to call.
Okay. I was going to wrap here, but you just brought up something that I want to ask you. Should an entry-level engineer be concerned that he might be replaced by AI?
Yeah, I don't know is the honest answer. And let me try to explain. We are not trying to reduce our headcount. We're trying to scale, right? We're trying to grow as an industry. And one of the biggest challenges our industry has in the coming decades is access to enough talent. And that's a broad statement. So you can imagine that our industry is always going to have a shortage, even if generative AI allows, significant increases in productivity and efficiency. We're still going to have a shortage of talent in theory. So for us, the way we think of it is, how do we, not remove any of our talent? How do we allow them to access, augment, amplify their impact and their capability with generative AI, which is exactly what we're doing. So at least from where we sit, that's where we see things today. But it's also worth putting the caveat out there. Most technology trends that we've seen in our lifetimes haven't moved as fast as this one is. So it's tough to call, and almost impossible, all the permutations of and implications. But at least for where the industry is today, I think it's an amplifier, not a detriment to our impact and to our talent.
Good stuff. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for being a good sport with us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks,
it's good
Matt.
talking to you guys.
That was Matt Johnson. He's the president and CEO of Silicon Labs. And I'm Rich Nass. And the other guy is Vin D'Agostino. Have a great day, folks.